The sky above Earth was no longer blue. It was filled with ships. Thousands of them hung in the darkness of space, their metal bodies blocking the sunlight. The largest ship sat in the center of the fleet like a king on a throne. It was called the Eternal Silence, and it was the most powerful warship in the galaxy. Admiral stood on the bridge of his great ship. He was tall and thin, with gray skin and 4 eyes that glowed softly in the dim light. He had commanded the Eternal Silence for 200 years, and in all that time he had never lost a single battle. His ship had destroyed entire civilizations. It had ended wars before they could begin. Now it floated above a small blue planet and felt almost bored. "Humans," he said to his officers, "such a young species. They have only been in space for 300 years. They think they are ready for the galaxy." He made a sound that might have been laughter. "They are not." The Empire had decided that Earth was a threat. Not today, perhaps, but someday. Humans spread too quickly. They adapted too fast. They asked too many questions. The Empire had seen species like this before. It was better to end them now before they became a real problem. Below the fleet on the surface of Earth, Captain Park watched the sky through the window of her command center. She was 42 years old, with short black hair and eyes that had seen too many bad days. Before the invasion, she had been an engineer. She had designed ships and weapons for the Earth Defense Force. Now, she led what was left of humanity's resistance. "How long do we have?" she asked. Lieutenant checked his console. He was younger than barely 30, with a serious face and quick hands. "They gave us 72 hours. After that, they start bombing the cities." "And our weapons?" Shook his head. "Nothing works. Their jamming field covers the entire planet. Every electronic system, every computer, every guidance system, all dead." Closed her eyes. She had known this would happen. They were famous for their technology. Their jamming fields could stop any electronic device from working. It was how they won their wars. They would surround a planet, turn off all its machines, and then destroy it piece by piece. Commander appeared on the screen. She was calling from the last orbital defense station that still had power. Her face was tired and her uniform was dirty. She had been awake for 3 days. "Captain," she said, "we tried everything. Missiles, lasers, rail guns, nothing can target them. The moment we power up a weapon, their jammers shut it down." "I understand," said. "Keep your people safe, Commander. We will find another way." Did not look hopeful. What other way? We cannot fight a fleet with rocks and sticks. The words hung in the air, said nothing. She simply stared at the screen as ended the call. Watched his captain carefully. He had known her for 5 years. He had never seen her give up on anything. Even now, with the world ending above them, she did not look defeated. She looked like she was thinking. "Captain," he said, "what are you planning?" Turned to face him. "You studied military history, didn't you? Ancient warfare." "Yes, it was my specialty at the academy. Why?" "Tell me something. When humans fought each other thousands of years ago, what weapons did they use?" Frowned. "Bows and arrows, swords and spears, catapults and trebuchets, weapons that used muscle and gravity, not electricity." "And did those weapons need computers?" "No, they were completely mechanical. You aimed them with your eyes and your hands." Smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. "They have been fighting wars for 10,000 years. They have forgotten what it means to fight without machines. Their jammers stop electronics. They stop computers, but they cannot stop a rock." His eyes widened. "You want to fight them with ancient weapons?" "I want to fight them with weapons they will not recognize. Weapons so old, so primitive, that their systems will not see them as threats." Walked to her desk and pulled out a dusty folder. "They expect missiles and lasers. They expect computers and targeting systems. They do not expect chunks of iron flying at their ships." "Captain, with respect, we cannot throw rocks at a spaceship." "Not rocks, kinetic projectiles, simple masses of metal launched at high speed. No guidance systems, no electronics, just physics." opened the folder. Inside were old drawings, plans from hundreds of years ago. Trebuchets, catapults, mass drivers powered by springs and counterweights. If we make them big enough, strong enough, we can launch payloads into orbit. Stared at the plans. His mind raced through the calculations. It was crazy. It was impossible. It was also the only idea that might work. "I need you to go to the archives," said. "Find everything we have on ancient siege weapons. Every blueprint, every design, every book written by every general who ever threw a stone at a castle wall. We have 72 hours to build an army of weapons that no one has used for 1,000 years." Stood straight. "Yes, Captain." He was almost at the door when spoke again. "They think we are primitive. They think we are weak because we are young. They do not understand something important about humans." "What is that?" "We have been killing each other for 200,000 years. We are very, very good at it." Turned back to the window. "Now let us show them what primitive really means." Left the room and ran through the dark hallways of the bunker. Above him, the fleet waited in silence. They were confident. They were patient. They had all the time in the universe. They did not know that in bunkers and factories across the earth, humans were already working. They were pulling old books from shelves. They were studying ancient designs. They were remembering the weapons of their ancestors. In space, Admiral received a report about strange activity on Earth's surface. Humans were building wooden structures, large frames and beams. He looked at the images and felt confusion. "What are they doing?" one of his officers asked. Studied the images for a long moment. Then he made that laughing sound again. "They are building toys. Perhaps they plan to throw sticks at us." He closed the report. "Ignore it. Focus on the countdown." 72 hours. That was all the time humanity had left. It would be enough. The underground factories of Earth had never worked so hard. In every bunker, on every continent, people were building. They were not building missiles or computers. They were building machines that their great-great-grandparents would have recognized. Returned from the archives with boxes of old papers. He spread them across the table in front of. There were drawings of Roman siege weapons. There were plans for medieval trebuchets. There were diagrams of Japanese war machines and Chinese crossbows. Thousands of years of human violence, all laid out on paper. "Our ancestors were creative," said. "They found many ways to throw heavy objects at their enemies." Looked at each design carefully. "We need something that can reach orbit, something that can throw a payload fast enough to hit those ships. I found this." Pulled out a large blueprint. A counterweight trebuchet. The biggest ones could throw stones weighing hundreds of kilograms. If we scale it up and add modern materials, we could launch payloads into low orbit. Doctor joined them at the table. She was a small woman with glasses and messy hair. She had spent her life studying physics, and now she was using that knowledge to build weapons that belonged in a museum. "I ran the numbers," she said. "A kinetic projectile does not need to be smart. It just needs to be heavy and fast. If we can launch iron masses at the right speed, they will hit those ships with the force of a bomb. No electronics, no guidance, just mass and velocity." "Will it work against their shields?" asked. Nodded. "Their shields are designed to stop energy weapons. Lasers, plasma, particle beams. A chunk of iron is just matter. Their shields might slow it down, but they cannot stop it completely. And if we hit them with enough projectiles, we will break through." In another part of the bunker, Sergeant Han was training soldiers. He was an older man, 55 years old, with gray hair and thick arms. He had spent 20 years in the military, but his true passion was history. He had studied ancient wars the way other people studied sports. "Forget everything you learned about modern combat," he told the young soldiers. "Forget targeting computers and automatic systems. You will aim with your eyes. You will calculate with your minds. You will fire with your hands." Private raised his hand. He was only 19, fresh out of training. "Sergeant, how do we hit a spaceship without computers?" Smiled. "The same way our ancestors hit castle walls from 300 meters away. Mathematics, observation, practice." He held up an old book. "This was written by a general who lived 800 years ago. He could hit a target the size of a door from across a valley. No computers, no electronics, just knowledge and skill." Across the planet, similar scenes were happening. Engineers were building giant wooden frames reinforced with steel. Workers were casting iron balls the size of cars. Scientists were calculating angles and velocities using nothing but paper and pencils. Lieutenant O had a different mission. She was preparing a squadron of shuttle craft for something that had not been done in centuries. She was training pilots to navigate without instruments. "They will jam every computer on our ships," she explained to her pilots. "The moment we launch, we will be blind. No radar, no GPS, no autopilot. We will fly the way ancient sailors crossed oceans. We will use the stars." Pilot Shin listened carefully. He was 28 years old and he had flown spacecraft for 6 years. He had never flown without computers. "How is that even possible?" he asked. Pointed at the sky through the window of their hangar. "You see those stars? They have been in the same positions for millions of years. Our ancestors used them to navigate across entire oceans. They sailed thousands of kilometers using nothing but starlight and simple tools. We will do the same." She handed each pilot a small device. It was made of metal and wood with no electronic parts. "This is called a sextant. Sailors used it to measure the angle between stars and the horizon. With this and a star chart, you can know exactly where you are in space." The pilots looked at the strange devices in their hands. They looked old. They looked primitive. They looked like toys compared to the advanced systems they were used to. "Trust the stars," said. "They have never failed humanity before." In space, the fleet continued to wait. Admiral received regular reports about human activity. The reports confused him. Humans were building large wooden structures. They were melting iron into simple shapes. They were training soldiers with devices that had no electronic signatures. "They have lost their minds," one officer suggested. "Perhaps the stress has broken them." "Perhaps," said, but something bothered him. Humans were not known for giving up. They were known for fighting until the very end. This activity, whatever it was, felt purposeful, organized. He opened a communication channel to Earth. Captain's face appeared on his screen. "Admiral," she said calmly, "to what do we owe this call?" "I am curious, human. Our sensors show strange activity on your planet. You are building structures of wood and iron. You are using tools that have no power signatures. What are you doing?" Smiled. It was a cold smile. "We are preparing." "Preparing with wooden machines. Do you think you can fight my fleet with lumber?" "You will see soon enough." Leaned forward. "I have destroyed civilizations with technology far beyond yours. I have burned worlds that tried to resist the Empire. Your planet has no weapons that can hurt us. Your systems are dead. Your defenses are useless. What can you possibly do?" Smile did not fade. "Admiral, you have been fighting wars for 10,000 years. You have developed technology that seems like magic to younger species. But you have forgotten something important. You have forgotten where all that technology came from. It came from species like us. Species that started with nothing but rocks and fire. Species that learned to kill long before they learned to fly. And what does that matter now? It matters because you have become dependent on your machines. You cannot fight without them. We can." Leaned closer to the camera. "Your jammers have turned off our computers, but they have not turned off our minds. They have not turned off our hands. They have not turned off 200,000 years of human survival instinct." The communication ended. Stared at the blank screen. For the first time in many years, he felt something he did not recognize. It was doubt. On Earth, the countdown continued. 48 hours remained. In factories and bunkers, the weapons of the ancestors took shape, trebuchets taller than buildings, catapults that could throw iron mountains, crossbows the size of buses. Stood among the workers, watching the chaos of construction, joined her. "The first weapons will be ready in 12 hours," he said. "We will have 300 siege engines operational before the deadline." Nodded, and the boarding teams. "Sergeant is training them now. They will carry chemical firearms and explosives, nothing electronic, nothing that can jam." Good looked up at the ceiling, imagining the fleet waiting in space. "Our ancestors conquered their world with stone and iron. Tonight we conquer the stars." She turned to address the workers around her. They were tired, they were scared, but they were still working. "The enemy thinks we are primitive," she called out. "They think we are weak because we do not have their technology. They are wrong. We have something better. We have 10,000 years of practice. We have the knowledge of every warrior who ever lived, and we have the will to survive." The workers cheered. The sound echoed through the bunker like thunder. Above them, the fleet waited in silence. They did not know that the storm was coming. The clock showed midnight. 0 hour had arrived. Across the planet Earth, 300 siege engines stood ready. They were massive machines, built from steel and wood and the desperate hope of a dying world. Some were trebuchets, with counterweights heavier than trucks. Some were giant crossbows, their strings made from cables thick as a man's arm. Some were spring-loaded catapults, wound so tight that the frames shook with stored energy. On each machine sat a payload: iron balls, steel cubes, dense masses of metal with no electronics, no guidance systems, no computers, just mass, just physics, just the oldest form of weapon in human history. Captain Park stood in the central command bunker. Around her, soldiers worked at manual stations. They had no screens, no digital displays. They had paper charts and mechanical calculators and the knowledge of 1,000 ancient generals. "All stations report," she ordered. One by one, the stations answered. "Europe ready, Asia ready, Africa ready, the Americas ready, Australia ready." 300 weapons pointed at the sky. "Begin the countdown," said. In the field outside the bunker, Gunner climbed the ladder to her trebuchet. She was 24 years old and she had trained as an artillery specialist, but she had never fired a weapon like this. No one alive had. The trebuchet was 60 meters tall. Its counterweight was a block of concrete weighing 50 tons. Its arm could throw a payload of pure iron into low orbit. The mathematics had been checked 1,000 times. The angles had been calculated by hand. Everything was ready. Reached the firing platform and checked the release mechanism. It was simple: a lever and a hook, nothing electronic, nothing that could be jammed. She looked up at the sky and saw the distant lights of the fleet. "For Earth," she whispered, then she pulled the lever. The counterweight fell. The arm swung upward with incredible speed. The iron payload flew into the night sky, rising faster and faster until it disappeared into the darkness. All across the planet, 300 machines launched their payloads at the same moment. 300 chunks of metal rose toward space. On the bridge of the eternal silence, nothing happened. No alarm sounded. No warnings appeared. The ship's sensors detected no threats. An officer looked at his screens with confusion. "Admiral, we are detecting objects rising from the planet's surface, but they have no energy signatures, no propulsion, no guidance." Admiral glanced at the report. "Debris, perhaps parts of their failed missiles. Ignore it." "But Admiral, they are moving very fast, and they are heading toward our fleet." Opened his mouth to respond. At that moment, the first projectile hit. A cruiser on the edge of the fleet suddenly broke apart. There was no explosion, no fire, just a massive impact that tore through the ship like a hammer through glass. The iron ball continued through the other side and vanished into space, leaving behind a dying ship. Alarms finally began to sound. Officers shouted in confusion. More impacts followed. Another cruiser, a destroyer, a carrier. Ships were being hit by objects that the sensors could barely detect. "What is happening?" demanded. "We are under attack, Admiral, but the objects have no signatures. Our point defense cannot track them. Our shields are not designed to stop solid matter at this velocity." On Earth, cheers erupted in the bunkers. The first wave had hit. The fleet was bleeding. "Reload," commanded. "Second wave in 5 minutes." The siege engines were already being prepared for another launch. Workers loaded fresh payloads onto the machines. Mathematicians calculated new angles to compensate for the fleet's movement. Everything was done by hand. Everything was done the old way. Lieutenant O received the signal she had been waiting for. "All pilots prepare for launch. We fly in 10 minutes." Shin sat in the cockpit of his shuttle. It was strange how quiet everything was. No humming computers, no glowing screens, just the darkness of the stripped-down cabin and the weight of the sextant in his lap. "Remember your training," his voice came through the simple radio. "Navigate by the stars. Trust your eyes, trust your hands. We will dock with the eternal silence and deliver our boarding teams." Looked at his co-pilot, a woman named Lee. She was pale but determined. "You ready?" he asked. "No," she admitted, "but I do not think that matters." The shuttles launched. They rose through the atmosphere without the help of navigation computers, flew by feel, adjusting his course based on the view through his window. The stars were bright and steady. They were the same stars that ancient sailors had used to cross the oceans. They would guide humanity once more. In space, the fleet was in chaos. More projectiles were arriving. Admiral watched in disbelief as his ships were destroyed by weapons that should not exist. "Adjust our shields," he ordered. "Reconfigure them to block physical objects." "We are trying, Admiral, but the systems are not designed for this. The shields will need to be lowered for." Clenched his fists. He had no choice. "Do it. Lower the shields and reconfigure quickly." On Earth, sensors detected the change immediately. Commander's voice came through the radio. "Captain, the eternal silence has lowered its shields. Repeat, shields are down." His eyes widened. This was the moment. This was the opportunity they needed. "All stations fire everything," she ordered. "Target the eternal silence, now." Every siege engine on the planet adjusted its aim. Every payload was loaded and launched in the fastest reload in human history. 300 iron masses flew toward the flagship. At the same time, shuttle squadron spotted the great ship ahead of them. He could see the damage from the first wave of projectiles. Holes in the hull, debris floating in space. The mighty eternal silence was wounded. "All shuttles follow me," he said. "We dock at the impact points. Those holes are our entrance." The shuttles swept toward the ship like ancient warriors charging a castle. They carried no weapons, but inside them were soldiers armed with rifles and explosives that used no electronics. Soldiers trained in combat techniques that were older than. Admiral finally understood what was happening. "They are boarding us," he said, his voice hollow with shock. "They are using our own damage to enter the ship." "Should we raise the shields?" "If we raise the shields now, we trap the enemy inside. If we keep them down, more projectiles will hit us." Looked at the tactical display. For the first time in his 200 years of command, he did not know what to do. Outside, the iron rain continued to fall. Ships burned and broke. Soldiers prepared for combat. Pilots navigated by starlight. On her platform, loaded another iron ball into her trebuchet. Her arms were tired. Her hands were raw, but she smiled as she pulled the lever again. "Our ancestors would be proud," she said to no one in particular. Above her, the eternal silence waited like a wounded beast. Its shields were still down. Its crew was scrambling to respond. And through the holes in its ancient hull, human shuttles were beginning to land. The second phase of the battle had begun. Listen to the reports coming in from the shuttle squadron. First shuttle has docked. Second shuttle has docked. Boarding teams are entering the ship. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Everything was happening according to plan. The impossible plan, the primitive plan. Keep firing, she ordered. Do not stop until that ship falls. The siege engines launched again, and again, and again. The night sky was filled with iron. In his command chair, Admiral watched his fleet die. He had conquered 100 worlds. He had destroyed civilizations that were older than human history. And now he was losing to a species that fought with rocks and sticks. Impossible, he whispered. But the burning ships around him said otherwise. The inside of the eternal silence was dark and filled with smoke. Emergency lights flickered in the corridors. The great ship was wounded, and it groaned like a dying animal. Lieutenant was the first human to step onto the deck. He carried a rifle that used chemical propellants to fire metal bullets. It was a design that had not changed much in 500 years. In his belt, he carried a knife. On his back, he carried explosives wrapped in cloth and triggered by simple mechanical timers. Move out, he whispered to his team. Stay quiet, use hand signals only. Behind him, 12 soldiers followed. They wore no electronic armor. They carried no digital equipment. They were dressed in simple protective gear, armed with weapons their great-grandparents would have recognized. The corridor ahead was long and curved. Strange symbols decorated the walls. The air smelled like burned metal and something else, something alien. They moved in silence, led them using a paper map drawn from stolen intelligence reports. He counted doors and turns, navigating the alien ship the way ancient explorers had navigated unknown lands. In another part of the ship, Corporal Moon led her demolition team toward the reactor. She was small but strong, with steady hands and calm eyes. She had spent 10 years learning how to destroy things, and now she was going to destroy the most powerful warship in the galaxy. The reactor is 3 levels down, she said softly. We take the maintenance shafts. The main corridors will be guarded. Private nodded nervously. This was his first real mission. He had trained for months, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of alien combat. The ship was so strange. The walls seemed to move. The lights seemed to watch them. Stay focused, told him. Remember your training, watch your corners, trust your squad. They found the entrance to the maintenance shaft. It was a narrow tube that descended into darkness. No lights, no handholds, just smooth metal walls. They never expected anyone to use this, said. Why would they? No species has used physical infiltration in thousands of years. One by one, the team climbed into the shaft. They used ropes and hooks, lowering themselves slowly through the darkness. Their only light came from chemical glow sticks that required no electricity. On the main deck, guards finally encountered the human invaders. A squad of tall, gray-skinned soldiers rounded a corner and found team waiting for them. They raised their weapons. Energy beams shot through the corridor, bright and deadly, but team was already moving. They had positioned themselves behind thick metal columns. They had studied the ship's layout. They knew where to hide. They had personal shields. They were designed to stop energy weapons. They shimmered with blue light as they advanced, confident in their protection. Raised his rifle and fired. The bullet passed through the shield like it was not there. The soldier fell backward, a hole in his chest. The other aliens stared in confusion. Their shields don't stop bullets, shouted. Fire. The corridor filled with the sound of gunfire. It was a sound they had never heard before. Explosive powder igniting. Metal projectiles flying through the air. Ancient technology that their advanced defenses could not understand. Within seconds, the alien squad was down. Steam moved over the bodies without stopping. They had no time to celebrate. More guards would come. In the maintenance shaft, Steam reached the reactor level. They emerged into a massive chamber filled with humming machinery. The reactor core sat in the center, protected by layers of metal and force fields. "Those fields will stop our explosives," said. Studied the reactor. She noticed something important. The force fields were controlled by power conduits that ran along the walls. If those conduits were destroyed, the fields would fall. "See those cables?" she pointed. "Those are the power feeds. We destroy those, the shields drop. Then we plant our charges." Nodded, he pulled a small crossbow from his pack. It was loaded with a bolt wrapped in explosive material. He aimed carefully, using only his eyes and his training. The bolt flew true. It struck the power conduit and exploded. Sparks flew across the chamber. The force fields around the reactor flickered and died. "Move fast," ordered. "We have maybe 5 minutes before they restore power." The team rushed forward. They planted their charges on the reactor's outer shell. The explosives were simple: chemical compounds wrapped around mechanical detonators, timers made of gears and springs, nothing electronic, nothing that could be jammed. On the bridge, Admiral received reports of fighting throughout his ship. Humans were everywhere. They were killing his soldiers with weapons that made loud noises and threw metal. They were moving through corridors that should have been impossible to navigate. They were treating his mighty warship like a building to be conquered. "Seal the bridge," he ordered. "Maximum security." The bridge doors closed and locked. Energy barriers activated around the command center. Felt slightly safer, but not much. He had watched his elite guards fall to bullets and blades. His confidence was shaken. "Admiral," an officer said, "the humans are approaching the reactor." "Stop them." "We have sent teams, but they keep appearing in unexpected locations. They are using pathways that our sensors cannot track." Slammed his fist against his chair. This was impossible. His ship had the most advanced security systems in the Empire, and yet humans were walking through it like they owned it. In the corridors, team was getting closer to the bridge. They encountered resistance at every turn. Soldiers, security drones, automated defense systems, but nothing could stop them for long. At one intersection, they faced a locked door protected by an energy field. There was no way through. The field would vaporize anything that touched it. Stepped forward. He carried a small mirror in his pocket. His grandfather had given it to him years ago, telling him stories about how soldiers once used mirrors to blind enemies and signal allies. "The control panel," said, pointing to a device on the wall. "It is optical. It uses light to verify identity." He angled his mirror carefully, reflecting light from a nearby lamp directly into the optical sensor. The sensor was confused by the bright light. It flickered and reset. For a brief moment, the energy field dropped. "Go," shouted. The team rushed through the opening before the field could reactivate. Simple trick had worked. A piece of glass, used exactly the way his ancestors had used it. At the reactor, his team finished planting their explosives. She set the mechanical timers for 10 minutes. That would give them enough time to escape through the maintenance shafts. "Charges are set," she reported through her simple radio. "Reactor will be destroyed in 10 minutes. Repeat, 10 minutes." Received the message. He checked his map. The bridge was just ahead. They had less than 10 minutes to capture Admiral and escape the ship. "Double time," he ordered. "We finish this now." The team ran through the final corridors. They encountered 2 more guard squads and eliminated them with brutal efficiency. They were learning to fear the loud weapons of the humans. They were learning to respect the species they had dismissed as primitive. Finally, they reached the bridge doors. They were massive, made of metal 3 feet thick. Normally, they would be impossible to breach. But had planned for this. His team carried shaped charges, designed to cut through metal using focused explosions. The charges were strapped to the doors and detonated. The explosion tore a hole in the bridge entrance. Smoke and debris filled the air. through the chaos, and his soldiers charged forward. Admiral stood in the center of his bridge, surrounded by his remaining officers. He stared at the humans as they emerged from the smoke. They were covered in dirt and blood. They carried weapons that looked like museum pieces, and yet they had conquered his ship. Raised his rifle and pointed it at the admiral. "Surrender," he said. Looked at the weapon. It was so simple, so crude. A tube of metal that threw smaller pieces of metal, and yet it had brought down the greatest warship in the galaxy. "Impossible," whispered. "This is impossible." His expression did not change. No, just old. Behind him, the timer on the reactor charges continued to count down. The eternal silence was dying, and humanity was about to announce its presence to the galaxy in a way that no one would ever forget. Admiral stood perfectly still. Around him, his bridge officers had their hands raised in surrender. Human soldiers surrounded them, their primitive weapons pointed at alien hearts. Kept his rifle aimed at the admiral. "Order your fleet to stand down, now." Hesitated. His pride screamed at him to resist, but he could feel the ship dying beneath his feet. The reactor alarms were sounding. The deck was shaking. His mighty eternal silence, undefeated for 3,000 years, was falling apart. "You cannot win," he said, but his voice was weak. "Even if you destroy this ship, the Empire will send 100 more." "Maybe," replied, "but they will know what happened here. They will know that humans fought back, and they will think twice before attacking us again." He pressed a button on his simple radio. "Captain, we have the bridge. Admiral is our prisoner." On Earth received the message. She closed her eyes and allowed herself one moment of relief, just one moment. Then she opened her eyes and spoke. "All teams begin evacuation. Reactor will blow in 6 minutes. Get off that ship." Throughout the eternal silence, human soldiers began retreating. They ran through corridors filled with smoke and fire. They climbed through maintenance shafts and jumped into waiting shuttles. The ship was dying, and they needed to escape before it took them with it. His demolition team was the first to reach the shuttles. She counted her soldiers as they climbed aboard. Everyone was present. No one was left behind. His team moved more slowly. They had to bring the admiral with them, walked in silence, surrounded by human guards. He looked at the destruction around him, bodies of his soldiers, broken machines, holes in the walls where kinetic projectiles had torn through. "How?" he asked quietly. "Your species is 300 years old. We have been conquering the galaxy for 10,000 years. How did you defeat us?" Did not answer immediately. He pushed through another corridor, stepping over debris. Finally, he spoke. "You asked the wrong question, Admiral. You should not ask how old our civilization is. You should ask how long our species has been fighting." "What do you mean?" "Humans have been killing each other for 200,000 years. We have been at war with ourselves since before we had language. We invented weapons before we invented writing. We perfected violence before we learned to fly." His voice was cold. "You think your technology makes you superior, but technology is just a tool. The will to survive, the creativity to adapt, the determination to fight with whatever you have, those are what matter. And humans have more of those things than any species you have ever faced." They reached the shuttle bay. Pilot Shin was waiting with the last transport. "Move it, we have 3 minutes." The team piled into the shuttle, shoved into a seat and strapped him in. The doors closed. The shuttle launched. Behind them, the eternal silence began to break apart. The explosives had destroyed the reactor. Without power, the great ship was falling. Its lights went dark. Its engines died. It drifted like a dead whale in the ocean of space. The remaining fleet watched in horror. Their flagship, their symbol of power, was gone. And around them, Earth's siege engines continued to launch their payloads. More ships were being hit. More ships were dying. The fleet commander made a decision. He gave the order to retreat. Within minutes, the armada was gone. They fled into the darkness of space, leaving behind the wreckage of their greatest warship and the bodies of thousands of their soldiers. On Earth, the siege engines fell silent. Workers collapsed from exhaustion. Soldiers cheered and cried and hugged each other. They had won. Against impossible odds, against the most powerful empire in the galaxy, they had won. Captain watched the sky as the last ships disappeared. She felt tired beyond words. Her body ached. Her mind was numb. But she allowed herself a small smile. The shuttle carrying an admiral landed in the command bunker's hangar, was waiting when the doors opened. She watched as her soldiers escorted the alien admiral out of the shuttle. Looked smaller than she expected. His gray skin was pale. His 4 eyes were filled with confusion and defeat. This was the being who had destroyed civilizations, and now he was her prisoner. "Admiral," she said, "welcome to Earth." Stared at her. "You have won nothing, human. The Empire will return. They will bring fleets so large they will block out your sun. They will burn your world to ash." Nodded slowly. "Perhaps, but they will pay a price for it. They will bleed. They will lose ships and soldiers. And eventually they will realize that conquering Earth costs more than it is worth." She stepped closer to the Admiral. "That is how humans have always survived, Admiral. We make ourselves too expensive to destroy." She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small. It was a stone arrowhead, chipped and ancient. She held it up for to see. "Do you know what this is?" Looked at the object. A rock, a primitive tool. "This is how humans survived ice ages, Admiral. This is how we killed animals 10 times our size. This is how we conquered every corner of our world before we even dreamed of the stars." Pressed the arrowhead into his hand. "Your species forgot what this means. You evolved past the need for such simple things. You became dependent on your machines, your shields, your jammers. You forgot that survival is not about technology. It is about will." Looked at the stone in his palm. It was light. It was crude. And yet it had brought down his empire's greatest weapon. "What will you do with me?" he asked. "You will remain as our guest," said. "Your knowledge of the Empire will be valuable, and your presence will send a message to your masters. Earth is not an easy target. Earth fights back." She turned to address her soldiers. They were gathered in the hangar, tired but proud. These were the people who had built trebuchets to fight spaceships. These were the warriors who had navigated by starlight and fought with weapons made of iron and gunpowder. "Today we showed the galaxy who we are," said. "We are the children of hunters who killed beasts with sharpened stones. We are the descendants of warriors who conquered empires with iron and fire. They called us primitive. They were right, and that is exactly why we won." The soldiers cheered. The sound echoed through the bunker like thunder. In the days that followed, Earth began to rebuild. Engineers studied the wreckage of ships, learning the secrets of alien technology. But they also kept their siege engines. They maintained their training in ancient warfare. They never forgot the lesson of the battle. The galactic community watched the broadcasts from Earth with shock and fear. The Empire, the most powerful force in known space, had been defeated by a primitive species using weapons that belonged in museums. It was impossible. It was terrifying. And it changed everything. Empires that had ignored humanity began to send diplomats. Species that had laughed at human backwardness began to request alliances. The galaxy looked at Earth with new eyes, and what they saw frightened them. Because the species that had thrown rocks at the stars was no longer just surviving. They were growing. They were learning, and they would never be underestimated again. In a training hall somewhere on Earth, Sergeant Hand stood before a new class of young soldiers. He held up an old book, the same book he had carried throughout the war. "Technology fails," he told them. "Machines break, systems crash, power goes out. But this," he tapped the side of his head, "never stops working. The knowledge of our ancestors, the will to survive, the creativity to fight with whatever we have. Those are our true weapons, never forget them." The young soldiers listened in silence. Behind them, through the window, they could see the night sky. Stars shone in the darkness, beautiful and cold. Somewhere out there, empires were watching, waiting. Private, now a sergeant himself, watched his old teacher from the back of the room. He carried his grandfather's mirror in his pocket, the same mirror that had helped him bypass an alien security system. He thought about how far they had come and how far they still had to go. The galaxy had learned something important about humanity, and humanity had learned something about itself. They were never alone. They carried the wisdom of every ancestor who had ever survived a cold night, killed a dangerous animal, or faced an enemy with nothing but courage and a sharp stone. Across the galaxy, empires began studying human history with desperate urgency. Not the recent history of spaceships and computers. The ancient history, the history of rocks and fire, the history of persistent hunters and cave painters, the history of a species that had refused to die for 200,000 years. Because that species was among them now, and no one was quite sure what they would do next.